Welcome back.
Welcome back, family, to Hear Us Out. I'm Renee.
I am Kyrie.
And once again, as always, I want to say thank you to everyone who has been with us since the very beginning. And if you're new here, thank you for finding us. Make sure to hit the subscription button so that you can continue to get notifications to hear us out.
Yes, and thank you. And on today's episode, we will be reading
Uh-huh.
book six
Right.
of Plato's The Republic.
Right.
Um, yeah, so last week we officially hit the halfway mark,
Right.
right?
And we went into all the crazy.
Yes,
all the madness.
I said that we've said many a times
Uh-huh.
before that like reading one of these chapters is like, oh, Plato's going off the deep end.
Right.
This is unprecedented.
Right.
We was not expecting to be hearing the type of stuff that were hearing.
Right.
But last episode kind of took the cake on that
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
one. And but we can say, at least I can say,
Mm-hmm.
that this chapter is something of a reprieve
Mm-hmm.
from that. I don't know how it's going, if it's going to continue, down this road, but I would say that this chapter is my favorite one
Uh-huh.
that we have read so far.
Yeah, I think he gets back to, what it is that we really, come to know of Socrates and Plato. And I think actually, like I said, I found it to be relatively refreshing, particularly after reading books, 4 and 5. So I was I'm not gonna say that I was pleasantly surprised. I was like, okay, I'm glad that we're here again.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Well,
Yeah.
here for the first time.
Yes. Yes.
In this one, because
Mm-hmm.
book 6
Mm-hmm.
is kind of like, he talks about why philosophers should rule
Right.
and what philosophy is
Mm-hmm.
and how it relates to the people.
Right.
And he begins to extrapolate, a lot about, the nature of a person,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or at least the nature of a good person and why that good person ought to be, put in a position of rulership.
Mm-hmm.
And even though, like I said, this is my favorite one so far, does not mean that we agree with
Right.
everything
Correct. That's
that
definitely
Socrates has
it. Yes.
said in this particular part,
Yeah.
but it just feels better to have. It feels better to be talking about the nature of philosophy and humans and stuff like
Right.
that, and not state-run eugenics program.
Right.
You know?
Correct. Correct.
So yeah, so let's get started.
Mm-hmm.
So we start with we start with Socrates talking to Glaucon about philosophers and doctors.
Right.
Philodoxers.
Mm-hmm.
From the real and the fake.
Right.
And that's kind of how book 5 ended
Mm-hmm.
with him defining what a philosopher is and what
A scammer.
particularly
Yeah.
what philosophers are not.
Right. Right. It's
Right.
scammers. Right. Mm-hmm.
And so he's talking to Glaucon and
Mm-hmm.
he said, "Look, we've defined it," and he begins to talk about why philosophers should rule.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and he says, because philosophers alone are able to lay hold of the ever same and unchangeable, and those who cannot do so, but keep wandering amid the changeable and manifold, are not philosophers, which ought to be leaders of our city. You know, so he asks the question. He says, I think Glaucon asks him
Mm-hmm.
on why philosophers should rule,
Mm-hmm.
and Socrates says, like he defined in book 5, on what a philosopher is.
Mm-hmm.
That a philosopher is someone who can definitively say
Right. You can
what
dictate
something is and what something is not.
Mm-hmm.
Who can say that and who can move in that. Other people whose opinions or ideas are changeable or constantly changing or constantly swaying and moving with
Mm-hmm.
the ebb and flow of human interaction and stuff like that. Those people are not philosophers, and
Mm-hmm.
those people are not fit to rule. The one person who is fit to rule is the one person who is able to best reach some notion of the truth,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for Socrates, truth is not regional. For
That's right.
Socrates, truth is not
Mm-hmm.
changeable.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is the truth,
Wherever the right.
wherever it is, in
Mm-hmm.
every instance.
Mm-hmm.
And like he's talking, and when he says truth, he's talking about it from a metaphysical
Right.
standpoint. And
Mm-hmm.
this is really when we start to see that dynamic, right? Because a lot of the times when people talk about platonic ideals, they're talking about the metaphysical thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like I think I've explained before about how there are no perfect circles in nature,
Mm-hmm.
right? There is no perfect circle in nature. The
Right.
only place where a perfect circle exists
Mm-hmm.
is inside of the ideal plane, the
Right.
metaphysical plane.
Mm-hmm.
So you would say that is platonic,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or the chairs that we're sitting on right
Mm-hmm.
now, that these chairs are a representation of the platonic chair, of
Mm-hmm.
the ideal
Deal.
chair,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's kind of when Socrates says the truth,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's saying that a philosopher is someone who is best able to understand
Mm-hmm.
and say what the Platonic truth
Truth
is,
is
what
right.
that one unchangeable truth is, where
Mm-hmm.
all the other ideas come from,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's how he defines,
Mm-hmm.
a philosopher and defines truth, right? And so he keeps going, right? And he keeps talking about, like I said, he talks about truthfulness being a necessity,
Mm-hmm.
right? And, and because all of this is very early on. These are the first
Yes.
few
Yeah.
pages,
This has been the first right
right? Mm-hmm.
because he talks about the philosopher being, a lover of learning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and a speaker of truthfulness. And I guess we'll get into that conversation of the next.
We can
Okay,
get into that
because
right
we
now,
get
because this is directly his
because
next quote. One thing in the
hmm
nature of philosophers, let us take as agreed that they always are in love with learning.
hmm
That is, whatever makes clear to them anything of that being which is eternal,
hmm
and does not merely wander about between the limits of birth and death. Further, they never leave hold of this thing, if they can help it, the whole or a part, neither a greater part nor smaller, neither a more honorable part nor less honorable.
hmm
We have shown that already in discussing levels of honor in the amorous. Next, consider if there be necessity to have something else in
hmm
the nature of those who are to be such as we described. Truthfulness, never to admit willingly a falsehood, to hate it, and to love the truth. Not only this is Glaucon says
hmm
that is likely,
hmm
and then not only likely, my friend, it is absolute necessity
necessity.
that one who is in love with anything by his nature should be fond of all that is akin to his beloved and at home in his beloved.
hmm So truthfulness, it's like I was mentioning before that suffix of ness,
Mm-hmm.
right? That means that it takes on the appearance. It seems that way.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it may not necessarily be that,
Mm-hmm.
but it takes on that air. And so
So,
with
yeah, like I said, a liar can have the air of
that's
truthfulness.
exactly correct. And he even talks about before how, you know, rulers being able to lie, right?
Mm.
And how, because he is the ruler and
Begrudgingly.
yeah, yes,
Yeah.
not just willing, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But it's airing on that image, that air of truthfulness, and that's something I think that is different from truth, and so
Yeah.
you know we
No,
have to
he
keep
does
that in
say,
mind.
truthfulness, never to admit willingly a falsehood, to
Right.
hate it, and to love the truth. So
hmm
he understands that a ruler
hmm
at some point is going to have to be dishonest with those people
hmm
who he is ruling, for
hmm
the betterment of, but that's never a willing decision. That
Right.
that is a compromise for what is best for the whole,
hmm
right? As far as he sees it.
Yes. Yes.
As far as
Right.
he
Uh huh.
sees it. And with this whole conversation with truthfulness, he talks like I say, he says it's an absolute necessity.
Yes, and I have that
It is an
highlighted. Yes.
absolute
Necessity.
necessity.
Right.
And I would say that because when I read that, I say that truthfulness may be a necessity, but it's not always a guarantee.
Correct.
You know,
Right.
it's very hard to discern. And I can't say it's hard to discern, but depending on how you feel about your ruler,
Mm-hmm.
and about how they create and go about
Mm-hmm.
creating laws and
Mm-hmm.
implementing these laws. It depends on where it falls on you,
Mm-hmm.
and then your opinion of the truthfulness of
Right.
said ruler
Mm-hmm.
depends on how their rulership falls on you,
Right.
right?
And like I mentioned before, that when you, at least for Plato, right,
Yeah.
in the creating of this city state, right, and I mentioned how before, that it's war like. Everything is leaning
Yes.
towards the fight. So
Even
even
when you're not having it.
yeah, so even your truthfulness, everything is going to lean, I think, in that way. And so that in itself can be problematic, and we're
Yeah.
going to continue to discuss that.
Because like I said, the truth to Socrates is not changeable.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is the truth is the truth,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And as a ruler,
Mm-hmm.
right, as a philosopher king,
Right.
you are someone who is best able to define and
Mm-hmm.
interpret the truth,
Right.
right? And so that means that everything that comes from the ruler,
Mm-hmm.
right? Every truth and or lie,
Mm-hmm.
right? Every law and custom is coming from that metaphysical truth,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this is, I can say it's somewhat spiritual, the truth that he is expressing in
Mm-hmm.
his rulership.
Mm-hmm.
And you would hope
Right.
that your ruler is working from that love of truth,
Mm-hmm.
because it is a necessity, especially if you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
create something like this.
Right.
You would hope that your ruler is. And really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter all of your cultural customs and all the things that you try to do to ensure a ruler like this.
Mm-hmm.
All you can ever do is hope
That's right.
that your ruler is coming from that
Yeah.
place.
And so,
But it
yeah,
is not a
guaranteed.
guarantee.
Right. And
You
that's
have
the
a system that
mm-hmm.
that is easily manipulated by those at
Correct.
the very top.
Right.
You just hope that they have what it takes,
Mm-hmm.
to use this power correctly. But there is nothing really ensuring that.
Right. And the thing with the that Plato has, discussed, you know, pretty much from the very beginning, is that in creating this city state in the way that he sees, is that it wants that it would guarantee particular outcomes. And I'm like, but that's not how people are.
Mm.
And that's the thing, even in regards to how he's talking about truthfulness. Yes, we would hope that. But even in the hope of that, you know, we understand that you are going to have people who rebel against that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing I find that Plato tends not to take into account, you know, that people's ambitions are grander than that of just that's not just relegated for the ruler, and that everything will stay in its particular order and particular place.
Mainly,
You
he
know,
thinks that everyone is just going to
except
accept.
right.
Everyone is just going to accept. Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah. The thing with acceptance is that
Uh-huh.
he's just thinking that people are going to
Mm-hmm.
accept his ideal of truth.
Right.
He's gonna the people are gonna accept that the ruler
Mm-hmm.
is coming from this place of
Right.
truth, right? But
Yeah, because this
especially like
truthfulness,
like you said, when
yeah,
you
it's
talk about
about maintaining.
ambition,
Right.
you talk about like ambition, like
Right.
not everyone is going to accept the position that they're in. You're
Right.
going to hope that they do,
Right.
because for you it's all coming from that place of metaphysical truth. But when you are, you're living your life
Mm-hmm.
and you want something else,
Else.
that metaphysical truth doesn't really matter when compared to that feeling, that
And what's
that
the
emptiness
aim?
that you
And
have
what's the
inside.
aim of this truthfulness anyway? What's the usefulness? You know, of this truthfulness. It would be it's to maintain this particular order of this particular state. So even then, it's colored. But again, we just have to hope, that
You have to hope
mm-hmm.
that the people
Right.
are going to accept your definition of truth.
Right. So,
And you try to manipulate you can try to manipulate your religions and your
mm-hmm.
culture and your history as much as you
Your
possibly
education,
can.
whatever, right?
Yeah, your education, all these things as much as you possibly can to try to get them to accept them. But still, you're betting on a prayer at the end of the day
Mm-hmm.
that people are going to accept this and that your rulers are going to work from this.
Mm-hmm.
You want that. You want that, but systems like this that pulls power
Right.
at the very top, right? And because that's what you're doing, right? You're taking those people who exhibit those qualities that you most treasure
Mm-hmm.
and think are most indicative
Right.
of the philosopher,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're taking those people and you're separating them and you're putting them at the very height of your society,
Right.
and giving them carte blanche responsibility
Mm-hmm.
to guide your society.
Mm-hmm.
That is essentially no different from what any other kingdom has
It's
done.
a recipe for disaster.
It's no
when
different.
when you pull that type of, I'm gonna say in the music quotation here, intellectual prowess or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
When you pull all of those resources to one particular space or to one particular class, and other folks do not have access to that intellectual, prowess and resources. Well, what do you think is going to happen? Well, you can look outside your door today.
You create
yeah,
an
you create
imbalance.
an imbalance. You
An
create
imbalance that can
inequity.
only be an imbalance that can only be bridged by those at the very top.
Mm-hmm.
But for those at the very top, to bridge that imbalance is to threaten their position at the very top.
Right.
So they have no real impetus to do that
Mm-hmm.
because they want to remain where they are.
Right.
So, like I say, you take these people, you separate them,
Mm-hmm.
you bring them to the very top, and then
Mm-hmm.
you give them all the responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Of making all the decisions.
Of making
right.
all
mm-hmm.
the decisions. You pull all power at the very, very strata
Mm-hmm.
of your society, right? And then you hope that your leaders are going to create the laws that need to be created, and declare the wars that need to be declared, and do all these things, and that it's going to be able to trickle down.
Yeah, I'm about to
everybody.
I'm like, we know about trickle down.
Yeah, and then
the trickle
everybody
down.
is going
Right.
to just follow it and
Yeah.
do it and accept it.
Right.
And it's like that's not
how it goes.
That's it. That's how the cities that you don't like
Right.
are created.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the problems come
Mm-hmm.
from. Like you try to say, Plato has created this warlike culture,
Mm-hmm.
right? That prioritizes the ideals of bravery and
The
no
guardian,
fear
right.
of death,
Mm-hmm.
and all these things, and prioritizes
Mm-hmm.
all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent that you're banning types of music and scales and stuff like that. You've created this type of culture that prioritizes the cultural identity of the warrior. Right? You've created that, and now you are, trying to build from that the exact same thing that every other city has done, but you're thinking that it's different.
Yeah.
Because you are working from that metaphysical truth. Right? You're working from that metaphysical truth. So it's going to be different. But it's like we said before, how those other cities that you take umbrage with are working off the very same blueprint that you're working from. No city is created to then become divided. No power structure is created to be broken. Right? But everybody always goes down the same logical path where
Mm-hmm.
you're going to need somebody who makes decisions, and
Mm-hmm.
they're going to need to be in the best position to make those decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to want a culture that prioritizes the type of things that
Mm-hmm.
we need from our leaders, so they can make those decisions
Mm-hmm.
and be able to maintain the bridge of trust and
Mm-hmm.
all that stuff. It's the same thing over and over again, and it always leads to this point of what in the world's going on?
Right.
How did we get here?
Right.
Where did we go wrong?
Right. You're
Right?
always
You
trying to
cannot,
perfect this
yeah,
particular
you
measure.
can't perfect war.
Mm-hmm.
You can't perfect the system. I think like we talked about when we were discussing this. It said lumberjacking, right? Being a lumberjack
Mm-hmm.
is a very dangerous job. It's one of
Mm-hmm.
the most dangerous jobs in the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there has been a lot of innovation
Mm-hmm.
in the field, but at the end of the day, you're out there with the chainsaw
Mm-hmm. And make
chopping
try
down giant
trees. Right.
trees,
Right.
and you'd have really no idea of where they're going to fall.
Mm-hmm.
You can try to do all of the things to make sure it falls
Falls
a
all right.
particular way and all that stuff, but you can't really control that at the end
Right.
of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And when the tree falls, it's falling that way, whatever it's going to
Right.
fall.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are in that path, you are going to die.
Right.
It's a very, very dangerous job.
Mm-hmm.
And so the best way to help a lumberjack
Mm-hmm.
and to help, the job is to eliminate the need for the job as a
All
whole.
together. That's right. Mm-hmm.
That's how you save lives.
Mm-hmm.
There's no safe way to be a lumberjack.
Right.
It's always going to be dangerous.
Right.
If you want to save their lives, you need to get rid of the job,
The job.
as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And the people who are innovating in this field understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Because their priority is trying to save people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's the same thing with a king.
Right.
Or a president or
Mm-hmm.
a chancellor, a prime minister or whatever.
Yes.
You can't do that right.
Mm-hmm. You cannot perfect that.
You can't
right.
perfect being a king.
Right.
Right? You can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because every time you try to do that, it's like I said, with the tree falling, you have no idea where it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
But in this instance, we know where it's going to go
Mm-hmm.
because that's where it always has gone
right.
since the dawn of time.
Right.
Ever since we've been trying this. It's the same thing. The ruler needs to best be able to rule and protect the city
Mm-hmm.
and protect its people, but also be able to rule its people and make sure the people are happy.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
But the people are only happy in service of the king. Right? I mean,
no, but ideally,
that's what I mean.
Ideally,
right.
the king's happiness is second to the city and its people.
Yeah, sure.
You right? You want to maintain that type of mentality,
Uh-huh.
and it's not like it's impossible.
It's right.
not like it's impossible.
Yeah, sure. Uh-huh.
Right?
Uh-huh.
There are instances in human history of the ruler whose own personal priorities take backseat to the people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You got your Connecticut's and stuff like that.
Yeah, you can probably name two.
Name a few on one hand.
Right. Literally on one hand. In the history of our existence.
That's the exception.
Yeah. That's why you can name them. That's why you can name them. That's right.
A majority, of rulers
Mm-hmm.
and governments always come up, and I don't know how many times we said
Mm-hmm.
this, always come up on the same decision
Mm-hmm.
where they have to choose between themselves
Right.
and the position that they occupy and their people.
Mm-hmm.
And it never fails.
Never fails. Without fail. Right.
The ruler, the king,
Mm-hmm.
the president,
Mm-hmm.
your prime minister, your chancellor, your government will always choose to maintain itself in
Mm-hmm.
its position, even over the needs of its people.
Right.
Every single time.
So,
That's how it goes.
Mhm.
There is no fixing that.
right.
That is the job.
Right.
Because their existence and the health of the society has been conflated.
Right.
Which means there is no health
Mhm.
without the king. And, without the government and stuff like that. There is no health without that stuff.
Mhm.
So if things are being healthy, of course, at some instance, they're going to have to choose themselves to,
Mhm.
to make sure that the ship is
Right.
continued to being righted.
Mhm.
That is, and it's like, and it's that thing right there, that right there,
Right.
is where it all falls apart.
Mhm.
Ain't no fixing that.
Right.
It doesn't matter, and especially there's no fixing it with the philosopher king,
Right.
right? Because like we've said many times, the idea in and of itself is a
It's
contradiction
a
at the most fundamental
mental level.
form
Right.
because no king needs philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
No king needs philosophy.
Right.
And philosophers sure as hell don't need
Right.
kings. Kings need to rule.
Right.
Philosophers need to be free to philosophize.
Right.
These things are
Actually
diametrically
opposed.
opposed.
And
There is no
right, if you're a philosopher, you wouldn't want to be a king anyway.
that's
That's
Plato.
right.
Socrates says it himself.
Right,
You wouldn't want to be a
the king
king
anyway.
anyway.
So
And
yes,
kings don't need philosophy.
no,
They need to rule.
that's it.
And that's all they end up doing at the end
That's
of the
right.
day. You know, and so Socrates goes on and on and on and on and on about this,
Mm-hmm.
about your philosophers and why they should rule and all these
Mm-hmm.
things. And it's like we understand the world you're trying to create.
Mm-hmm.
The world that Socrates is trying to create is the same world that every philosopher and
Mm-hmm.
person who's ever thought about something wrong with this
Mm-hmm.
world is trying to create. You're trying to create a world of peace and harmony where people can be happy,
Mm-hmm.
where people can be safe, and there's, all that good stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? But, but the system, the idea of a ruler is, like I say, it is opposed to an idea of a peaceful world.
Mm-hmm.
Rulers imperil people.
Yes, you can't. Right.
There's no way
Right.
around that.
Right.
If you're trying to make people happy, if you're trying to make them safe, then you are not trying to rule them.
Correct. Then there, you need job security if you're a king,
Mm-hmm.
right? You need job security, right? So you're going to need a particular amount of madness, chaos, battles, wars. You're going to need conflict. You're going to need conflict in order to maintain your power and your position.
Mm.
You're going to need conflict in order to garner more power for your position. And that's constant.
Mm-hmm.
That's constant.
And the thing with philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
right, is that it takes you away from that type of mentality
Mm-hmm.
by Socrates' own, definition,
Mm-hmm.
right? No one who actually wants to see and do something about the way things are is
Mm-hmm.
actually trying to be the one to do that,
Right.
right? There's a difference between, like, it's like a W.E.B. Du Bois,
Mm-hmm.
right? W.E.B. Du Bois was an intellectual.
Mm-hmm.
He was not a leader.
Mm-hmm.
He was not a leader, right? That's because he understood the problems of his day.
Right.
And to understand the problems of your day, the type of person that you need to be to get to that point
Right.
is not the type of person that's going to grab hold of the
Right.
time and direct it in an
Right.
instant. That's a whole different character.
Right.
That's a whole different game now,
Mm-hmm.
right? W.E.B. Du Bois told you what you need to do,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
All that's left is for people to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, like I say, no leaders.
Right.
At no point, you don't need a leader. You don't
Right.
need to be ruled. You just need to do the thing,
Right.
right? And that's the thing with philosophers.
Mm-hmm.
The philosophers don't tell people how to, how to live or,
Mm-hmm.
how to rule. It's about telling people that if this is the problem
Mm-hmm.
with your world, then this is the solution,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's not up to the philosopher to implement that.
Right.
It's up to the people to who feel like that there's something wrong
Mm-hmm.
to go about trying to correct it.
Yeah.
And all you can do is lend your 2 cents.
Yep.
About that. And
Right.
that's kind of what that's kind of the point that Adamantus
Right.
makes here.
Mm-hmm.
Right, when he says, "What you say, Socrates, no one could contradict. But you should know what happens to those who hear you each time you speak in this way. They feel their own inexperience in question and answer, and they think they are led astray a little in each question, so that at the end of an argument, the many littles make a muckle. They stumble badly and find themselves contradicting what they said at first. It's like a game of checkers when bad players in the end are held in check by the good players and can't make a move. So they also find themselves in check and can't make a speech in this other game with words for counters. And they feel indeed that they have not grasped the truth any better by this game. I speak with an eye to the present case. As things are, one might say that in each question he cannot contradict you in argument, but they say what they see in fact is that of those who applied themselves to philosophy and spend a long time in the study, not those who only touch it as a part of education and drop it while still young, most become regular cranks, not to say quite worthless, and those who are considered the finest are made useless to their cities by the very pursuit which you praise.
Yep, I literally have that right.
Yep. So he pretty much says that getting into the argument with Socrates doesn't help, it doesn't get anyone closer to the truth. They just feel hemmed up and pinned in by all the, words and logic puzzles that he comes up with. Right? So they don't feel like they've grasped the truth.
Right.
They only feel like they've been unable to make their point.
Right.
And unable to argue against yours. Right? And you do all of that. And so you're not really espousing the truth or changing a mind. Right. You're just ending an argument, right? But the main thing is that philosophers, like they become cranks and they are made worthless.
Yes.
They are made worthless.
Yeah, I think he's the word useless, huh?
Useless.
Right. I think that's the term he says. Right.
Yes. To say quite worthless. Useless, all those things. They become useless, worthless to the maintenance of the city. They become angry, they become cranks, right? And that's that seems to be
that's pretty much that's exactly what happened, right?
Yeah, that seems to be it. That's them. And it's like, yes, Socrates, none of your previous things change that point. Philosophers don't want to rule. Right. Philosophers don't want to live in these cities. Right. They sure as hell don't want to rule them. Right? So they're made useless. They don't want to have anything to do with this stuff. Anything to do with it. So how can they be the ones best fit to rule? Right. Right? When you've been rendered utterly useless. Right? How can they be doing? And like we said before, right? The best person to have power is the person who doesn't want it. Right. Right? And that's kind of what Socrates is trying to say. Right. Right? But the only way to get power is to chase it. It's rare, very rare, when power is given to those who don't want it. Because we know those people are going to do what's best for the whole for society and not themselves because they don't want to. Right, and like you said, you can literally call their names. Yeah, you can name it on one hand. That's right. Throughout history, those people. Right, but it's like that is the exception to the case. That is not the norm. That is not the norm. Right, and so Socrates tries to to defend his
of course,
defend,
right,
philosophers, right, because he talks about how can I say this? He talks about he's going to have to use a parable. Oh right? Right. He's going to have to use a parable, and then Adamantes kind of gets on him about Socrates.
Another story, another parable.
And he pretty much is parable being an anecdote, and that the only evidence in the argument that Plato can make of Socrates can make to elucidate his point is anecdotal, right? But Socrates is like, look, there is no definite case for this, but I'm right. Right. there's no definite case, but I'm right.
But I'm right.
Right. And so he goes on about parables and stuff like that. He say, you make fun of me after dumping me into an argument so hard to prove. Listen to my parable then and see more than ever how greedy I am of parables. The fact is that what happens to the finest philosophers in their relation to cities is hard. There's no single thing in the world like it, but one must compile a parable from all sorts of things to defend them, like a painter painting a goat stag and other such mixtures. Imagine a ship or fleet of ships in the following state. The captain is above all on board in stature and strength, but rather deaf and likewise rather short-sighted, and he knows navigation no better than he sees and hears. The crew are quarreling about pilotage, and everyone thinks he ought to be pilot, although he knows nothing of the art and cannot tell us who taught him or where he learned it. Besides, they all declare that it cannot be taught, and they are ready to tear in pieces anyone who says it can. They all keep crowding round the solitary captain, begging and praying and doing anything and everything to get him to hand over the helm to them. Sometimes one party fails, but another succeeds better. Then one party kills the other and throws them overboard. And the good, honest captain they bind hand and foot by the same opiate or intoxicant or some other means and take command of the ship. They use up all the stores, drinking and feasting, and make such a voyage as you might expect with such men. Besides, they have their votes of thanks. One has a testimonial as good navigator, another is a born pilot and master mariner. There are for any who are good hands and backing them up when they try to persuade or compel the captain to let them rule. For those who will not, they have a vote of censure, good for nothing, and the true pilot is nowhere. They won't listen to him. They fail to understand that he must devote his attention to year and seasons, sky and stars and winds, and all that belongs to his art, if he is ruler to be anything like a ruler of the ship, but that has for gaining control of the helm with the approval of some people and the disapproval of others. Neither art nor practice of this can be comprehended at the same time as the art of navigation, which such a state with such a state of things on board the ship, don't you believe the true born pilot will be dubbed stargazer, bibble babbler, good for nothing, by those afloat in ships so provided? That he would. I don't suppose you want us to examine the parable bit by bit, and so to see how this is exactly what happens between the true philosopher and the city. I think you understand what I mean. Certainly. That's pretty much the point he says, is that those things that most people think makes the philosopher useless is actually why they are most useful.
Right.
Right? But no one is going to recognize that because they aren't exhibiting the prototypical traits of, the useful person in a society. They don't exhibit those traits. Right? And so you rob them of their position. You belittle them and say that they're good for nothings. They're bibble babblers, stargazers,
Right.
all that stuff. Their heads in the clouds.
Right.
Right? When actually they were the ones most fit to pilot the ship. And now you got all these people who exhibit the traits of being a pilot, like you say, who are natural born pilots and have just this innate talent for it.
Right.
And now
you're lost, right?
You're lost.
That's
your
right.
food gone and all that stuff. Well, like I said. So yeah, to that point.
Okay. Yeah.
I get what you're trying to say, Socrates. I get what you're trying to say. But there's a difference between being, like I said, there's a difference between being a ruler and being a philosopher. Like you just showed in your thing, it doesn't matter if you ever get home. It's not about getting home. It's about being the pilot. For you, it's about making sure you survive the voyage. Right. That ain't the case with the people on the ship.
That's right.
It's about the voyage in and of itself. And the stores may be gone, and you may have no direction of where you're going. But they, even at that desperate moment, they ain't turned into the true pilot, quote unquote.
That's right.
They ain't turned it back to him. They're still going to go for the people who exhibit the traits that they want for their pilot. Right. And it doesn't matter if there's no food and no direction. They're going to constantly go to that person.
That should sound very familiar.
I mean, because that's the nature of these types.
That's of right, right.
Like, I think it was in House of Cards when he was like, "You don't need me to stand for anything. You just need me to stand." Yeah, that's the thing. You don't need to be good at your job. You just need to be good at standing. Yeah, like, just stand there and look good as a pilot. I mean, being actually capable is secondary to the point.
I mean, I would mention, see Donald Trump.
The laundry list of ineffectual
Joe Biden. Yes, right.
Yes.
like, see.
Who don't stand for anything. They just stand. And everybody else just gloms on to them, all this stuff.
Right. Okay. Right.
We know, right. You don't have to stand for anything. Right. That's the point. And even then, the true pilot stood for something. And it cost him his job.
Well, yeah.
Okay. And since even in your own anecdotal
evidence,
you belie the point. And that's the point. Rulers are those who are best able to rule.
Yeah.
Period.
Right.
And
Philosophy not needed.
ruling, like it is directionless.
Uh-huh.
Ruling is like peace. It exists in and of
Self.
itself.
Right.
It exists to continue itself.
Mm-hmm.
A ruler exists to continue to rule.
Mm-hmm.
The ruler does not exist to impart, happiness and or kindness and or joy to the life of those that are ruled. The ruler exists to rule,
Mm-hmm.
period, and does what they do to maintain their rule.
The end.
The end.
Right. You can slow. That's
And
it.
that's how it
That's
goes.
all. That's how it
It
goes.
doesn't matter if the ship sinks.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if there is no food and no direction.
Right.
You rule.
Mm-hmm. All the way to the end.
To the bitter
end. Right.
All the way to Davy Jones' locker.
That's right.
Right? So that's how it goes. And that's why, like I said, these things are diametrically opposed. They're diametrically opposed.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to squeeze them together, but you can't.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. Right? And it keeps going. It keeps going. And he eventually, and said that there's more. There's more points.
Yeah.
Cognitive dissonance. There's a
Mm-hmm.
nature and nurture, and talk about
Mm-hmm.
teaching people up and all that good stuff. All these things we've heard before,
Mm-hmm.
and all of them still belie the point.
Right.
All of them still belie the point of the shortcomings of a ruler, because there's no right way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really escape that. Can't really escape that, Socrates, right? And I think that the next point that I really want to talk about, right, is on page 299.
I even did a little bit further. Okay, all right.
299, right?
Okay.
Let me see. They would take a city of men and manners, as it were, already sketched on a panel, and they would begin by wiping the panel clean, which is not at all easy. But then be sure that here they would at once differ from others. They will not want to put a finger to a city or man or inscribe a law until they make the panel clean themselves or get a clean one. The next thing would be to make a sketch of the Constitution. Don't you think so? After that, I would say they would work on that picture. They must cast a glance constantly this way and that. They must look now upon what is just in its real nature, or good or temperate, and so forth. And now again upon what they are implanting in mankind, mixing and mingling from various practices the man's tint for the man's image, judging from that which Homer called, when it appeared in human beings, the likeness divine and tint divine. Here they will erase, no doubt, and here they will insert until, as far as possible, they will make human manners as like as men can be to those the gods loves. Right? And I also I said that the type of change Socrates is looking for doesn't happen from the top down, but the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
He keeps trying to talk about creating this measure of a man and making sure that measure right is at the very tippy top, and that person is at the very very tippy top, and it's like there is no law, no constitution,
right,
that is going to be able to attain the type of change Socrates is looking for. You're talking about changing a people.
Correct.
Laws don't change people.
Right. And I think we know this already. Like we say, catch up to your knowledge. We know this. We are experiencing this now. But it's been the same experience for
I'm just saying, like
centuries upon centuries.
Murder is illegal.
Right.
But people kill each other all the time. You can legislate against it as much as you want. You can make it as hard as you possibly can, but people kill each other. Right? If you want to change your people, you can't just say, all right, now it's illegal to kill each other.
Right.
That's not going to do anything.
Right.
No, it's all the other societal factors that's
that
changes a person from being a killer to being a normal, I guess, being a well-adjusted, non-murderous human being. Right? That's those things change people.
Right.
Your society, your culture, the interplay of the social interaction.
Right.
Those things change people.
Right.
And that's not from the top down.
That's
from the bottom
definitely
up.
ground up. Right.
That's from the ground up. That's how you change a people. And I even say that the type of world that Socrates is looking for is only possible when the gold is made worthless, right? He talks about, like we've said many times before about this caste system, about how there's a few people who are born with that gold, and those are the people who are best fit to rule, right? Because they have the character traits, they're temperate, and they're brave, and they're all that good stuff. And it's like, if you take those people and you have them live apart, like I said, in this privileged strata of society, you're not going to change your city.
No.
You're going to get the exact same thing that all the other cities get. The only point where you get that change that you're looking for is when that gold
is dispersed,
is no longer rare.
When it's among all of the
when it
people,
is found in abundance in everyone. And at that point, it's going to be worthless. And even though it's worthless, it's no less beautiful.
Right.
You have to change why it's worth, where the value comes from. Not from its rarity, but from its beauty. And you want to find it absolutely everywhere. Right? So at that point, that means that you don't take the people and who are born with that gold, right, and have them live apart.
Right.
Those people,
they need to be everywhere.
They need to be at the very bottom with everyone else.
That's right.
And they need to be able to dispense their gold, right? So everyone has the gold, right? And so you get more and more people born innately with that gold.
That's what you want anyway. That's
from,
what you say.
From the bottom up. And that's how you keep a society honest. And seeing at that point, like we said many times before, you're not going to need rules.
Right.
You're not going to need all that stuff.
Right. You'll be able to fix, and disperse of any challenges, because all the people are there to do that. I remember sharing out how many years ago, right, particularly like in black neighborhoods, right, you would have the nurse, a doctor, the teacher, the carpenter, the lawyer, whatever. They all lived on the same block, in the same neighborhood. I'm like, and everyone talked about like how nice these neighborhoods were, how beautiful they were, how everybody got along, It was clean, it was this and that, whatever. That's because you had the spectrum of people, top to bottom. First of all, there was no top to bottom because everyone was there, right? So then we started taking our what I call that brain trust, and classing them out, right? So now all of the your engineers or whatever, they all live over there, and folk are not in contact with them on a regular basis. I'm like, take a look outside. That's the problem. And so for Plato, trying to create these particular classes, they're all to themselves. It's an echo chamber that comes about. And so we know that there isn't any trickle down. We know that. But you need all of your goodness everywhere. It shouldn't be in a particular spot, or just relegated over there. Yeah. That's the problem. That's the problem.
And that's the problem.
That's the problem.
That's the problem when you try to take those good parts and separate them from those things that you call bad.
Right.
And think that in that separation you're alleviating the bad.
Yeah, because
when you're ensuring it.
Yeah, exactly. Because in that area they have all the resources, right? So therefore you tend not to have all of the issues and problems in another neighborhood that doesn't have the same type of resources. Okay? In this one area where you have, the mental health care services that's easily accessible. In this one you have a whole bunch of cops. And the problems are the same, but you're responding to them differently. And so
You see?
you see the result of that.
Mm-hmm.
So when folks talk about defunding the police, you know, they're talking about taking good resources and dispersing them where they're needed.
But the most needed.
Where they're most needed. But folk,
Yeah.
we don't understand that. Okay, so
So yeah.
yeah, so that's where we are.
So Socrates goes on,
Mm-hmm.
right? He goes on and he talks about the nature of good,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
And this is when you start to get real metaphysical here,
Uh-huh.
because he's
Yeah.
talking about where justice comes from.
Uh-huh.
Like I said, he's talking about something greater than justice.
Mm-hmm.
In
Yes,
his own
because
words,
that's
talks
as
about.
he says that.
He talks about
The
how
greatest task.
good
Uh-huh.
is greater than justice,
Mm-hmm.
because justice comes from the good.
Yeah. Or possession. I think he literally says possession of the good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that it is something that can be held.
He says on page 303. Mm-hmm. Oh dear no. Just ask me. Certainly you have heard it often enough. But now either you don't understand it or else you want to make difficulties for me by interrupting. That's what I rather think, for you have often heard that the greatest task is to learn the perfect motto of the good, to use of which makes all just things, and other such become useful and helpful. And now you know pretty well that I am about now you know pretty well that I am about to speak of this, and to say besides that we do not know the motto sufficiently. But if we do not know it, you know it will not be of any advantage to us to understand all the rest perfectly without the motto, just as it is no advantage to possess anything without the good.
Mm-hmm.
Do you suppose there is any gain in possessing everything in the world without possessing the good,
Mm-hmm.
or to understand everything in the world except the good, to understand nothing of the beautiful in the good?
Mm-hmm.
And it said the modes of ensuring justice are greater than justice itself.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So that's why the good,
Mm-hmm.
the good is more, is more valuable. It's greater than justice. And then he goes on trying to explain the good. Now this is the whole thing here.
Right.
On how he tries to explain.
Yeah. Well, you know that already. You know there's gonna be a whole lot of
the
text.
whole thing. All right, so just bear with me on this.
Right.
Right? So I'm on page. Ooh, no, I didn't even work. Oh, okay. Look here then. Do hearing and sound need anything else besides to hear and be heard? So that if this third be absent, hearing will not hear and sound will not be heard.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing, he answered. And I believe that most, if not all, the other powers need nothing more. Can you tell me of one? No, I cannot. But don't you notice that the power of sight and the visible do need something else? How so? If sight is in the eyes and the possessor tries to use it, and if color is in the things I suppose that it will see nothing, and the colors will be unseen unless a third thing is there, specially created for this very purpose. What is that? Of course, that which you call light. True. Then how great is the conception through which the sense of sight and the power of being seen have been united by a more precious bond than the other pairs, unless light is quite without worth. Oh no, far from that. Then which of the gods in heaven can you put down as cause and master of this? Whose light makes our sight see so beautifully, and the things to be seen? The same as you do, and everyone else, it is plain that you mean the sun. Shall I suggest how sight is related to this divinity? Well, how? Sight itself is not the sun, nor is that in which it is, which we call eye. It is not. But sight is the most sun-like, I think, of the organs of sense. Moreover, the power which it has is always being dispensed by the sun, like an inundation, and sight possesses it, certainly. Then again, the sun is not sight, but the cause of sight, and it is seen by sight itself. Surely now, my meaning must appear to be that this, the offspring of the good, which the good begat, is in relation to the good itself, an analogy, and what the good affects by its influence in the region of the mind towards mind, and things thought, this the sun affects, in the region of seeing towards sight and things seen. How? Please explain further. When a man turns his eyes no longer to those things whose colors are pervaded by the light of day, but on those pervaded by the luminaries of night, the eyes grow dim and appear to be nearly blind, as if pure sight were not in them. But whenever he turns them to what the sunlight illumines, they see clearly, and sight appears to be in these same eyes. Understand then that it is the same with the soul. Thus, when it settles itself firmly in that region in which truth and real being brightly shine, it understands and knows it and appears to have reason. But when it has nothing to rest on but that which is mingled with darkness, that which becomes and perishes, it opines, and it grows dim sighted, changing opinions up and down, and is like something without reason. So it is. Then that which provides their truth to the things known and gives the power of knowing to the knower, you must say, is the idea or the principle of the good. You must conceive it as being the cause of understanding and of truth insofar as known. And thus, while knowledge and truth, as we know them, are both beautiful, you will be right in thinking that it is something different, something still more beautiful than these. As for knowledge and truth, just as we said before, that it was right to consider light and sight to be sunlight, but wrong to think them to be sun. So here it is right to consider both these to be good light, but wrong to think either of them to be the good. The eternal nature of the good must be allowed a yet higher value. Mhm. So there's still more here, but he's defining the metric, right, of the good, right? How he talks about it is like seeing, right? When you look at a thing and you see that thing over there, right? Those two things are good in and of themselves as a sense, but it is not the sense in and of itself because something else is making that possible. Some greater thing, light, and light comes from the sun. Right, your eye is not the sun. The thing that you're seeing is not the sun. The sun is the sun, and that dispenses the light that makes all those other good things possible. Right, that makes all those other good things possible. Such is the same thing with knowledge and truth and justice and temperance. All of those things are mere elements of a greater cause, of a greater thing, of the sun itself. But that sun itself, that main source, like I said, that metaphysical truth, that main thing is yet higher still. And it illuminates all those other things and makes possible all those other things which we consider to be like good, to be of good nature,
Right.
but not to be good itself.
Right. And I remember when I was reading this, because of course there's more text. The thing that I thought about is the power to be seen and the power to be heard. What that really means for people, for individuals, to be seen and to be heard. And I also thought about the Invisible Man. Right? I don't know. I mean, that's what I thought about. I mean, like I told you, like when I'm reading, I'm always, and I thought about the Invisible Man. How he wasn't invisible. Obviously, he was not physically invisible.
He was metaphysical.
Right. But what that means not to be seen and not to be heard.
Not to be understood.
Not to be understood. Right. Okay? And what that does to a people. And I'm like, we know what it is. We know that power in being seen and being heard, being understood.
But all those things are merely just elements.
That's right.
Of that higher thing. To be seen, to be heard, to be understood.
Right.
All part of that one thing that we want more than anything else.
Right. And it's a transaction, but I don't want to make it seem as if it's a dollar cents type thing. Right? Because, if you recognize and you hear and you see and you desire, you want to understand that, what that means for the person that is being seen, the person that's being heard. That kind of transaction, that kind of understanding, how good
Mm-hmm.
that would be. And that's what people for centuries, I guess, and particularly, I mean, since I like to talk about us,
Mm-hmm.
what we have been wanting, craving,
But it
demanding,
is, like I said,
you
it
know?
is metaphysical.
Mm-hmm.
It is beyond the
That's
realm
right.
from which we exist in.
Mm-hmm.
We all we can ever do is really approach that
Mm-hmm.
and try our best to approach it as
Mm-hmm.
a people,
Right.
as a whole.
Right.
Is try to approach that place
Mm-hmm.
where all the other good comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Like you say, that's one of the things here. Like you can't build it; it's
Right.
already been built.
Mm-hmm.
You can't create it; it's already been created. You can
Mm-hmm.
only reach it, if
Mm-hmm.
anything, reach for it,
For it's right.
right? So yeah,
Yeah. So keep going.
let's
Right.
finish this off
Yeah. That's
here.
okay. Mm-hmm.
The Son provides not only the power of being seen for things seen, but as I think you will agree, also their generation and growth and nurture, although it is not itself generation. Of course not. Similarly, with things known, you will agree that the good is not only the cause of their becoming known, but the cause that knowledge exists and the state of knowledge, although the good is not itself a state of knowledge, but something transcending far beyond it in dignity and power. All right. And then they start. Then, because Glaucon compliments him and says, "Oh, you're so
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Right. right.
I'm so right." So it just keeps going on. Right. So it says, "Conceive then that there are these two, as we say, and one reigns over the region and things of the mind, the other over those of the eye. Not to say the sky, or you will think I am playing on the word. Now then, you have these two ideas, distinct, seen and thought. Suppose you take a line and cut into two unequal parts to represent the proportion, the worlds of things seen and things thought, and then cut each part in the same proportion. Your two parts in the world of things seen will differ in degree of clearness and
Mm-hmm.
dimness, and one part will contain images. By images, I mean first of all shadows, then reflections in water and in surfaces which are of close texture, smooth and shining, everything of that kind, if you understand. Yes, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Take the second part of this, of the things which the images resemble, the animals about us, and all trees and plants, and all kinds of manufactured articles. Would you be willing to admit that in respect of truth and untruth, there is the same distinction between the opinable and the knowable, as there is between the image and its mind
Mm-hmm.
and its model? So he's pretty much saying here it's the same thing we've talked about between like something being provable
Mm-hmm.
and something being true.
True. Mm-hmm.
But for him, it's the opinion,
Mm-hmm.
right, and knowable.
Right.
It's something that you can opine
Mm-hmm.
about, and but something that you can actually know.
Right.
There is a gradient between these things, and there is a diminishing effect.
Mm-hmm.
The further you begin to bisect
Right.
away from that
That's right. That's right. Mm-hmm.
primeval
Mm-hmm.
cause, right? And that's kind of the measure he's taking here. And at the end of the day, it's Glaucon that is able to sum this all up in the
Mm-hmm.
end. I understand, though not sufficiently, for you seem to me to describe a heavy task, but I see that you wish to lay down that a clearer perception of real being in the world of mind is given by knowledge of dialectic than by the so-called arts, which start from pure assumption.
Mm-hmm.
It is true that those who view them through these are compelled to view them with the understanding and not the senses. But because they do not go back to the beginning in their study, but start from assumptions, they do not seem to you to apply a reasoning mind about these matters. Although with a first principle added, they belong to the word of the mind, the mental state of geometricians, and such like you seem to call understanding, not reason, taking understanding as something between opinion and reason.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's pretty much talking about the difference between someone who knows a thing
Mm-hmm.
through knowing it and someone who has a sense of
Right.
a thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Through right opinion, as
Opinions.
he's talked about many a times
Right.
before.
And of
These
course, we
things.
know that if opinion, if it's not what I have, if it's without knowledge,
Mm,
he calls it ugly.
mm,
Now, yes, it's ugly. And I mean,
yeah.
oh yeah.
See, like I said, up to a point.
Point, of course, up to a point.
Up
Mm-hmm.
to a point where anything can be known
Mm-hmm.
is debatable at the very least.
Yeah, we
But
talked about that. Okay,
that's
right.
always when you're working from that place
Mm-hmm.
of a definite
Mm-hmm.
cause, right? This cause and effect relationship. So
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to move closer and closer, like I said, to that primeval, primordial
Mm-hmm.
cause. And you think the closer you become to that, the closer you become to the truth.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said before, if there is one perspective, one actual truth,
Mm-hmm.
it does not exist in the human reality.
Mm-hmm.
If one perspective does matter more than anyone else's perspectives, then it is not the perspective that a human being can have.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about the perspective of God,
Mm-hmm.
of some divine otherworldly thing,
Mm-hmm.
and that may be one. As
Yeah.
an absolute point can be
Mm-hmm.
one, it may be one to us,
Mm-hmm.
but that one is everything essentially. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a multitude
That's
of
right.
infinite
That's right.
absolute points. So
Right.
but still, like you hear the siren in the background.
Welcome to the city.
Yeah, but still, that one up there, that one
Mm-hmm.
is not something that you can grasp,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not something that you can actually work from.
Mm-hmm.
You can't build from a sense that you do not have, from a perspective that you cannot see, that even now you struggle to understand. And that's okay. It's fine. It's good. That might be why we were created to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Not to build from the perspective of God, but to
Mm-hmm.
build from the perspective of humans.
Mm-hmm.
Our perspective is fallible. It is subjective. It is meant to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's meant to change and grow with us. It
Right.
is not meant to stand as cement, as
Mm-hmm.
one definite cause.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what we as human beings are capable of and can even begin to approach. We live in the effect of that primeval cause, if there is one. We cannot reach it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it doesn't mean you don't reach forward. Go ahead and
Mm-hmm.
philosophize about it. But when you are building, you cannot build from a perspective you do not have.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying not. You need to build for the people from what you do have.
Mm-hmm.
A human society,
Right.
right? Maybe if God came down himself and built up this society, then you can have that one
Right.
primeval thing,
But
and you can create the
since
type of
it's
society that you're
you,
looking for. But since it's
you
you,
that's doing the work. Come on, bro.
then that's not the world
That's right.
you can create.
Mm-hmm. And anytime you try to lean into that one that you think is the one, well, just simply take a look outside your door.
And see what it wrought.
Right.
So yeah, if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments. And once again, thank you for hearing us out.
Thank you.